Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jake Wynn, Director of Interpretation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. Hope you all are having a wonderful afternoon so far. As you can see by my merry, jolly hat, that we are going to be talking about Christmas with today's program. Today we're going to be hosting a presentation here on our Facebook page and over on our YouTube channel, focused on Frederick, Maryland's Civil War hospitals and how they celebrated Christmas during that time. This is one in a continuing string of live programs that we have been hosting through the National Museum of Civil War Medicine's social media pages, Facebook, YouTube as well. We hope you have been enjoying all of these programs. I know that our staff and our volunteers and everyone who's been involved with making these videos has really enjoyed making these videos and doing these programs with all of you. And I just want to thank you all so much for all of the amazing support that we have gotten over the past almost a year now since the pandemic started. We really appreciate all of your support out there. If you do want to continue to support the museum at this time, you can do so by becoming a member of the museum, by donating to the museum as well. And you can do that at the link that I am about to share here. You can support us. We are doing a fundraising drive right now, trying to raise $25,000. We're coming up on halfway to our goal. So if you do enjoy these programs, $5, $10, $100, $1,000, every little bit helps to support what we do. Also allows us to continue to upgrade our equipment and make our programs a little bit better. So if you do enjoy these programs, consider becoming a donor, consider becoming a member of the museum as well. If you want to support us in other ways, you can help us by going and clicking that like button, clicking the share button, or by following our page. There is an option to follow the museum, so you get access to our programs. Let me see if I can find the button here that allows us to show that option. Not finding it at the moment, but if you do go onto our Facebook page, facebook.com/civilwarmed, you can follow us there, and that allows you to see when we're going live, when we're hosting programs, that sort of thing. We are just crossed over 29,000 likes on our Facebook page, which is awesome. Huge support from all of you here on Facebook. Consider inviting a friend to come and join in and in the learning, to enjoy our nation's history, and to share it with those who might be interested. So with all of that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our short program that we have here. This is a program that was originally given and designed in 2016 by me, hosted a presentation at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, Maryland. It is a particular favorite presentation to give for me. I am a fan of all things Christmas, as you can see, rocking the green sweater with the Christmas tree hat, which I'm going to take off here in just a second. But this program in particular hits on my passion and love for Christmas history, in addition to my passion for Civil War medical history as well. So get to blend a little bit of both of them with this presentation today. Before we go over to the presentation, just going to give some shout outs here in the comments section. So hello to Ryan, who loves the hat. I appreciate that. I love the hat too. Barbara with Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you, Barbara, as well. Merry Christmas from Helen. Hello to Gary, Robert, and Chris. Just got a membership. He and his sister. That is awesome. Thank you so much for becoming a member of the museum. We are really appreciative of the support. If you are enjoying the program or have questions or comments and want to join in the conversation, go ahead over to the comments section. We have a wonderful group of supporters there and folks who always have a kind of ongoing conversation as these videos are taking place. It's a fun way to interact, even though we're all stuck in our homes or watching on our phones or wherever you may be. Comment section is a great way to make new friends and to join in the conversation. I see lots of other folks jumping in to the comment section as well. So I will take off the hat and go back into becoming a historian again, and jump on over to our PowerPoint presentation for today with some images and some great quotes. Those of you who have seen programs of mine in the past, you will know how much I do enjoy a great quote, and there are plenty of them in this presentation today. I will say, as we're going through the presentation, which isn't going to be too long of a presentation today, I won't be able to see the comments. So if you do have questions and you're wondering why I'm not responding to them, I can't see them at this point. But at the conclusion of, again, this is going to be a kind of a shorter program today, I will be able to respond to any questions you might have and take a look at those comments and see how the conversation is going and kind of jump in and just have fun. So today's presentation coming up, one of the last programs of the year. I want this to be a fun one. So feel free to jump into the comments section, give us a like and a share, help us any way you can. So before we get started, I have to talk a little bit about Christmas, where it is in 1860 at the outbreak of the Civil War. We have a great program that Brad Stone, one of our wonderful volunteers, did at the Clara Barton Missing Soldiers Office Museum last year that was recorded and is on C-SPAN. So if you want a kind of refresher on where Christmas is in terms of traditions in 1860 and during the Civil War era, you can jump on over to our main Facebook feed. We posted a video a few days back of Brad doing this Christmas presentation. I'll drop it into the comments section at the conclusion of the video as well with a direct link. But Brad talks about how Christmas had evolved from the colonial period to the time of the American Civil War, and had begun to take on a lot of the modern flares that we have today. Things like Christmas trees are going to become a part of the American Christmas tradition. I have just watched a fantastic movie, The Man Who Invented Christmas, just a few weeks ago about Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol, which was available to readers during the Civil War era in the United States, written about 20 years before the war broke out. So the trappings of modern Christmas are beginning to take shape, including things like our modern version of Santa Claus is in many ways going to be shaped out of the cartoons drawn by Thomas Nast during the Civil War era. So the Civil War is going to play a really crucial role in kind of creating the modern Christmas traditions that we have in many different forms. But Christmas was, in 1860, a holiday that was celebrated North and South. It is going to be a holiday that is going to have different regional associations. Now, New England, Puritan New England, is actually an area where Christmas didn't have much of a start in early American history. It's kind of a slow roll, whereas in our previous presentation, my previous one about Thanksgiving, we talked a lot about the Thanksgiving traditions that came out of New England and went to the rest of the country. Christmas traditions in New England are actually kind of tamped down, mostly because of, again, connections to Puritanism and that Christmas was not generally celebrated there during the colonial era. It's going to be celebrated in its own way by the Civil War time period. But this is going to be a tradition, Christmas traditions are going to be a little bit different all over the country. And there's quite a bit of writings about this. 1860 is the country is in a very tumultuous place, looking at Christmas as a kind of a uniting element in the United States, a celebration that is North and South. It goes across sectional divides, across political divides, that folks are getting together and celebrating Christmas, coming together as families. An editorial from Godey's Ladies book talks about Christmas not being a time for quarrels. This is a time of peace, of joy, of getting together, of family, bringing everyone together. But of course, in December of 1860, the country is at a very dangerous place. 5 days before Christmas, December 20th, 1860, South Carolina is going to announce its secession from the Union, and this is going to start a crisis that is going to devolve into what will eventually become the outbreak of the Civil War just about 4.5 months later. multiple states are going to be, South Carolina secession is going to start a string of secessions in January and February of 1861 that are going to lead to the formation of the Confederate States of America, and ultimately going to, again, kind of lay that path towards civil war. Those seeds are being sown in the Christmas time period in 1860. So there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of drama in American politics going on in 1860, and a lot of fears of a coming crisis and potentially a war. But when we get into looking at individuals and what people are experiencing in Frederick, Maryland, which is what we're going to be talking about today, somebody we're going to return to time and time again is this guy whose name you see here, Jacob Engelbrecht. Was a tailor living on Patrick Street, the main east-west thoroughfare through the city of Frederick. Kept a diary for decades through the 19th century, which has been lovingly maintained and kept at Heritage Frederick, formerly the Historical Society of Frederick County, has been published. It is an incredible accounting of Frederick, Maryland during the 19th century, including of Christmas traditions and their evolution during the 19th century, including during the Civil War era. Engelbrecht is a very nosy fella. He is, because of that, a great diarist and gives us a lot of rich detail. And he talks in December of 1860 about traditions that are very reminiscent of what we experience in the 21st century. Going out for a nice walk, going to church, going to see family for dinner. These are things that Jacob Engelbrecht and many millions of people are doing in the United States in December of 1860. And those traditions still reach down the ages to us today. The country in 1860 is on the verge of war. And as I mentioned, the path to war comes from the Christmas era with the secession of South Carolina in December of 1860. By the spring of 1861, the country has fully devolved into a civil war, which is escalating and worsening, and is going to make Frederick, it's going to put Frederick in the crosshairs. This is a map of Frederick during that time period, during the 19th century. It kind of gives you an idea of the importance of Frederick and why time and time again armies are going to arrive in Frederick, which Frederick, Maryland, for those of you that may be watching for the first time, hello to you all. Frederick is a few miles south of the Pennsylvania border. It is south of Gettysburg, north of Washington, D.C. It is west of Baltimore and just east of the mountains that are going to extend out towards West Virginia, Western Maryland, Western Pennsylvania. So Frederick is going to be crucial during the Civil War because it's at a crossroads. And you can see this on this map. You can see the hub of roads coming into and out of Frederick, as well as Frederick being very close to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and the C&O Canal. So this is going to make Frederick a really crucial crossroads during the war. It's going to bring armies in all 4 years of the Civil War, going to use Frederick in various ways, in some cases, in fact, fighting in and around Frederick itself. In 1861, with the outbreak of the war, Frederick is going to come under the United States Army's control. That starts in the summer of 1861. The control of Frederick is going to be solidified. It is going to be made Maryland's capital in the summer of 1861 during the secession crisis in the state of Maryland. Ultimately, Maryland does decide to stay in the Union. Lots of controversy over that. There are arrests made of Southern leaning legislators in the Maryland state system. Ultimately, again, Maryland's going to vote to stay in the Union, does not vote to secede. But by the fall of 1861, the importance of Frederick kind of really becomes clear to the U.S. Army, and they're going to station an army there, a small army by Civil War standards, but Nathaniel P. Banks is going to be in charge of about 10 to 15,000 men in this region of Maryland. Many of them are going to be stationed in and around the city of Frederick. So all around Frederick, which kind of sits in a low spot in this valley just east of Catoctin Mountain, is going to become the seat of war. It is going to have army camps all around it. And this you can kind of get from the account here of Wilder Dwight of the 2nd Massachusetts writes about this, describing the city kind of from their army camp, which is a place called Camp Hicks, just on the outskirts of Frederick. This is where the 2nd Massachusetts and many other units are going to be stationed in November, December, and January of 1862. A little later on, they're going to go and fight in the Shenandoah Valley in the spring of 1862. But the 2nd Massachusetts is going to be pretty important to this story, mostly because my favorite letter that is ever written during the Civil War comes from Christmas 1861, as Frederick is being occupied by all of these Union soldiers. One of those soldiers is a pretty famous fellow. You see him on the screen here. His name, familiar to many of you, Robert Gould Shaw, famously played by Matthew Broderick in the movie Glory. He writes what is, I consider, my favorite Civil War letter on December 25th, 1861, in the early morning hours at Camp Hicks, which is just on the eastern outskirts of Frederick, overlooking the Monocacy River, with Frederick just beyond it. And he writes a letter to his mother back home in Massachusetts. And this is what he writes. It says, quote, "It is Christmas morning, and I hope it will be a happy and merry one for you all, though it looks so stormy for our poor country. One can hardly be in a merry mood." My Christmas Eve has been very much like many other Eves during the last 6 months. On the whole, I have passed quite a pleasant night, although what our men call the forepart of it was principally occupied in taking care of 2 drunken men, and in tying a sober one to a tree. After this was over, I did a great deal of reading, and towards 1:00 a.m. had some toast and hot coffee. Having previously invited my sergeant to take a nap, so that I might not be troubled by hungry eyes, and made to feel mean, for there wasn't enough to give any away. The drummer, who with the sergeant of the guard for some reason which I never discovered, sits and sleeps in the officer's tent, kept groaning in his sleep, and I couldn't help imagining that his groan always came in just as I took a bite of toast or a large gulp of coffee. This diminished my enjoyment, and when he suddenly said, "Martha, there isn't any breakfast," I was certain that my proceedings were influencing his dreams. It began to snow about midnight, and I suppose no one ever had a better chance of seeing Santa Claus. But as I had my stockings on, he probably thought it not worth his while to come down to the guard tent. I didn't see any of the guard stockings pinned up outside their tent, and indeed it is contrary to army regulations for them to divest themselves of any part of their clothing during the 24 hours they are on guard duty. He concludes with, "Merry Christmas and love to all, dear mother, your loving son, Robert G. Shaw." Again, one of my favorite letters from the Civil War era, written by Robert Gould Shaw, who's serving with the 2nd Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. He will fight in the spring in the Shenandoah Valley at Antietam in 1862. And in 1863, it's going to become the colonel of the 54th Massachusetts, which is a famous Black regiment that is going to serve. And he ultimately will be killed leading that unit in July of 1863 in South Carolina. So as Shaw is in an army camp on the outskirts of Frederick, he's having not a super pleasant Christmas evening, but one that is certainly better than the Christmas that is being experienced in Frederick's first military hospital. And that is going to be what becomes known as United States General Hospital No. 1, what had turned 2 Revolutionary War era barracks into a hospital complex. This ground was also used as the fairgrounds for Frederick County, and is going to be turned into a large military hospital in 1861 due to the large number of sick soldiers who are being need treatment as a result of poor sanitary conditions, poor hygiene in many of these army camps in and around Frederick. This hospital is going to be established in October of 1861 and is going to occupy this site on the south side of Frederick until after the war is over in the summer of 1865, when it is dismantled. It is today the Maryland School for the Deaf occupies that ground. And one of these buildings, this building, in fact, right here, does stand to this day. So if you want to see the Hessian Barracks, you can still see one of these buildings that was used as a hospital in 1861. So as you can see at the bottom of this slide, this is a quote from Van Willard of the 3rd Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry. 3rd Wisconsin is among the units that is going to spend quite a bit of time in Frederick in the winter of 1861. And Willard comes down with typhoid fever in the fall of 1861, and he's going to be treated become one of the first patients at U.S. General Hospital number 1. And he writes, keeps a diary, a very detailed journal of his experiences during the Civil War. And he writes of being sick and what it was like at Christmas time to be in this hospital. He, by this time, had recovered from typhoid fever enough to become a nurse to the other patients in the ward. He wasn't ready to go back to his unit, but they did keep him to help with all of the other sick soldiers in the camp. And this is what he writes on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1861. It says, quote, "'Tis Christmas Day, but to me it's not been a very merry one. All day I have been in my wardroom with the sick. 1 year ago today, I was at home with my friends, enjoying the blessings of civil life. But what a change. Today, I find myself 1,000 miles from home, an attendant in a hospital, my home, the sick room, my companions, the sick, the dying, and the dead. Yet I am happy, for I am in the discharge of a high and noble duty. To take care of the sick and afflicted is now my duty, and gives me pleasure to care for them and provide for their wants. 2 more poor soldiers have died today. They have been sick for a long time, wasting away slowly by disease. But now they have gone, dying together, sinking hand in death." Quite a bit more depressing from Van Willard, and that's his experience in what was a very makeshift hospital in the first year of the war. This is going to be a development as the conflict goes on. These hospitals of 1861 are going to be increasingly looked at as very dangerous, deadly places for patients. As the war goes on, the understanding and knowledge of many of the medical professionals is going to increase substantially. So much so that we're going to look back on the early years of the war and realize, wow, we really didn't know what we were doing at this point. And the lessons that are going to be learned at places like U.S. General Hospital number 1 in Frederick are going to inform developments that are going to come later as it revolves around Civil War hospital design, sanitation in these hospitals, how to organize, who is in what ward, keeping sick patients away from those with battle injuries and battle wounds. These sorts of decisions and experiences are going to make ultimately outcomes for patients significantly better as the war goes on. So we see that a little bit right here with Van Willard's diary, which again is much less positive, much darker than Robert Gould Shaw's version. Those camps, the Camp Hicks and this hospital, are only about 2 or 3 miles apart. So a very different experience of the holidays between these two. Now, I don't have a Jacob Engelbrecht diary entry for Christmas Day 1861, but just a little bit of the civilian perspective on this. What a difference a year makes for them as well. Frederick had about 8,000 residents in 1861. And they are going to be experiencing their first army occupation. Martial law in the city of Frederick being kept by soldiers. Keeping saloons closed and restaurants were limited in terms of who they could serve to. This was a totally radically different experience for Frederictonians to experience. And it was a divided city. Frederick County does send quite a number of Confederate soldiers off to the Confederate Army. You know, there are many Unionists in Frederick as well, but this is a very divided time in Frederick. And now you have armies moving through the city, This is going to be kind of a bellwether of some of the tumultuous times that are yet to come. And in 1862, in fact, some of the same units that are there in 1861 are going to participate in some of the heavy fighting that is going on, including Van Willard, who does recover fully from his sickness, only to be wounded at the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862, and ultimately come back and be treated in Frederick's makeshift hospitals. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So Frederick does become kind of the seat of war again, is known around the world as the places where Union and Confederate armies are kind of passing each other in the lead up to the Battle of Antietam. In September of 1862, Frederick is occupied by the Confederate Army. Union Army of the Potomac close behind them. There's some street skirmishing. The U.S. General Hospital No. 1 is going to be captured by Confederate forces. The Union Army evacuates all its supplies out ahead of that invasion by Robert E. Lee's army. But ultimately, Frederick's role in 1862 is going to become one vast hospital. Jonathan Letterman, somebody, again, if you have watched our other videos, you hear his name quite frequently. He is the medical director of the Army of the Potomac. He chose Frederick as the hospital depot for the Union Army during the Maryland campaign in 1862. And ultimately, the city of Frederick is going to receive about 8,000 to 10,000 patients in the span of a few weeks after the bloodiest day in American history, the Battle of Antietam. That is about one wounded or sick soldier for every city resident. So it essentially doubles the population of Frederick overnight. And in the weeks that follow, and then ultimately the months that follow, there are dozens of buildings in Frederick that are going to be turned into makeshift military hospitals. And Frederick goes through a real crisis moment. It is going to become the center of the medical response to the Civil War, but specifically to the Battle of Antietam. And doctors and medical personnel and supplies are going to be rushed in from all over the country to Frederick to care for wounded Union and captured Confederate soldiers by U.S. Army medical personnel. So Antietam inspires this change, and it's going to lead to this, what we call the one vast hospital period in Frederick's Civil War history. So Christmas 1862, December of 1862, there are still thousands of patients being treated, probably more like hundreds of patients being treated by December of 1862 in Frederick. They are from the Union Army mostly, but there are still captured Confederates that are being treated in the city of Frederick. There's a great description here of Frederick at that time from this an officer in the Union Army named Stephen Bogardus. We have this book for sale in the museum, a collection of his letters in the museum store in Frederick. And he says, "This city, which contains about 8,000 inhabitants, was the great hospital for the wounded of Antietam. United States Hotel and the principal churches and public buildings were turned into hospitals." He also noted that you couldn't walk around the streets of Frederick without seeing somebody who had lost an arm or a leg, were either walking on crutches with an empty sleeve, empty pants leg, or walking around with a pinned sleeve on their coats, showing that they had been in battle either at Antietam or South Mountain and had lost a limb in the service of their country. One of the doctors who rushes into Frederick in the aftermath of the Battle of Antietam is a doctor from Ohio named Dr. Asa Bean. He's going to become a contract surgeon with the Union Army. He's going to arrive days after Antietam, and he's going to serve in a hospital on Church Street, which is where there's going to be quite a number of hospitals in Frederick. And he is going to take over medical duties and responsibilities at the Old Episcopal Church on Court Street, just south of the burned out remnants of the Frederick County Courthouse, which had burned in 1861. And he is working with patients starting in September and is still working in that hospital in December and at Christmas time in 1862. His letters are digitized and are online, courtesy of the University of Iowa. I'll put a link to those letters in the comment section at the conclusion of the video. They are transcribed. The photos are there. They're not super easy to access, and it's a little difficult to get through them, but they are worth it because they are an amazing source of information about this time period in Frederick's history, and also what medical care was like in a crisis like the aftermath of the Battle of Antietam. But he is at the Episcopal Church, the old Episcopal Church on Court Street, for Christmas 1862. And he writes a letter home to his family back home in Ohio. And he writes from the Episcopal Church and talks a little bit about the celebration of Christmas in one of these Civil War hospitals. And this is what he writes the day after Christmas, 1862. Yesterday being Christmas was a welcome day to most inmates of this old church. Had a high day, turkeys and chicken, several kinds of cake, sauce, apple, and peach dried. Fresh steamed and stewed apples, a variety of pickles and pies, etc., of as good quality as could be found on any table and in great abundance, sufficient for 2 dinners. This is as a result of the efforts of relief organizations, Sanitary Commission, the Christian Commission, but especially of local residents. In 1861, Ladies Union Relief Association is going to be founded in Frederick, and they are going to do more work than just about anybody else, including the U.S. Army, to supply the wants of the patients in Frederick's makeshift hospitals. They are going to do astounding work. The local women volunteers in Frederick to gather supplies being sent in from across the country, gathering their own supplies, and ultimately making Christmas meaningful to all of the patients, again, Union and Confederate, in the hospitals in Frederick, where patients, whether they were wearing blue or gray, were treated side by side. That was mandated by the Surgeon General, William Hammond, that care be given equally in the hospitals in Frederick. Now, the sketch you see here is actually from a hospital that is about a block away from where Dr. Asa Bean was located. And this was in the Presbyterian Church on 2nd Street, a sketch made by an inmate of that particular hospital. And he shows a scene that would have been reminiscent of all over Frederick in 1862. And this similar celebrations to what Asa Bean described are going to be held in many of these hospitals. And the Frederick Examiner, in this quote you can see here, is describing that a bit, that the Frederick community came together with all of the medical personnel to try to ease the sufferings, the ghastly wounds. Many of those left behind by December of 1862 were those who were most severely wounded, who were still hanging on, who were still alive, or had succumbed to disease, were in low state in these hospitals. So conditions in those makeshift hospitals were pretty ghastly, but they made the best of it when it came to Christmas time in 1862. And this isn't just a Frederick phenomenon. This is something we see in Washington, Baltimore Civil War hospitals, in Philadelphia. You're going to see it in 1863. You see it in Confederate hospitals as well at the South. You see them using the resources that they have to try to give the soldiers who have sacrificed the most, either losing limbs through illness, who are serving at the front lines, as they're in hospital, to make them comfortable, give them something to remember, some positivity in what had been a very, very dark year in 1862. Fortunately, only gets darker in 1863. Fortunately for the residents of Frederick, when the Gettysburg Campaign happens in the summer of 1863, Frederick is largely spared from the direct results of battle. The Union Army is going to pass through the city of Frederick and its environs to get to Gettysburg, north of the city. And because Gettysburg was close to a rail link to Baltimore and Philadelphia, Frederick is largely spared in terms of having to become a hospital again after the Battle of Gettysburg in July of 1863. That being said, U.S. General Hospital number 1 on the south side of Frederick, that we mentioned in the 1861 section, by 1863 had significantly expanded. And it's going to have multiple hospital wards set out in a pseudo-pavilion style with separate wards laid out in areas to ensure good airflow, lots of windows. You can see it in this illustration from 1865 of a little bit of what that hospital looked like. Again, all of these buildings that you see here are gone, with the exception of one Revolutionary War barracks that still stands. But this section here, for those of you who may have been through Frederick, you're looking at Market Street. You're looking north on Market Street, heading down the hill towards downtown Frederick. And on the right, if you were standing, basically, the perspective of this painting is from Mount Olivet Cemetery, looking out across the city, what would be today the Maryland School for the Deaf. You can see the churches in the background. This hospital had expanded by 1863, and because the Union Army is going to use Frederick as a sort of base of operations to pursue Robert E. Lee to the Potomac River in the aftermath of Gettysburg, Frederick is going to end up treating a lot of the some of the captured, wounded, and sick Confederates who were taken during the pursuit, and Union soldiers who fall ill during the march to the Potomac or in the time afterwards, and some of those who may have minor wounds during the Battle of Gettysburg who stayed with their units and then their condition worsened. Frederick is going to also have an occupation force left behind even as the armies moved south into Virginia later on in 1863. And those soldiers oftentimes will become sick. There is skirmishing and fighting along the Potomac River with elements of John Mosby's Rangers. So Frederick is still very much relevant in 1863 to what's going on. But they're going to have much less patience than they had in 1863. And some examples over here of what that was like, the Christmas celebrations in 1863. Much fewer, many fewer patients, but the citizens do come together and they're going to put on a celebration, put on a good Christmas for the inmates of U.S. General Hospital Number 1. And that includes, as Jacob Engelbrecht mentions in that quote there, that people are coming to visit. They're coming and they're saying hello. They're giving their regards. They're bringing gifts. They're bringing money in some cases as well to support the hospital and the relief efforts going on there. This is a very much so, as is the case all through the Civil War, the Frederick community comes together to assist and to make the lives of these wounded and sick soldiers a little bit more pleasant for the Christmas holiday. This is going to be a theme we're going to see again in 1864, and the circumstances are going to be a little bit different. As we go into 1864, important to recognize that events in the wider scale of the war. Now, 1862 and 1863 are really dark years in Frederick, really dark years for the Union in general. The casualty figures continue to grow. The battles become increasingly deadly. More and more patients need to be cared for. But by 1864, the Unionists in Frederick are going to have a lot to celebrate at Christmas time. And that comes through in the accounts from Frederick's military hospital's Christmas celebrations. In 1864, of course, in the days leading up to Christmas, William Tecumseh Sherman captures Savannah, the end of the March to the Sea, gives Savannah as a Christmas gift to the nation, to Abraham Lincoln specifically. And this is going to lead to kind of a massive celebration in Frederick. And it's going to kind of be a predecessor to what is going to happen in 1865 when the city is going to do a grand illumination to mark the occasion of Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox. This is lots of joy, lots of feelings that the war is finally drawing to a close. Again, this is the Unionist citizens of Frederick who are feeling this. The Confederate sympathizers in Frederick are feeling increasingly gloomy as a result of all of this. In the hospital at U.S. General Hospital Number 1, we have a lot more patients in 1864, and that is because the hard hand of war had come directly to Frederick's door in 1864. It comes in the guise of Jubal Early and his 18,000 Confederates who had stormed up the Shenandoah Valley, or down the Shenandoah Valley to the Potomac River, crossed the Potomac, and is going to invest Frederick from the west, and is going to demand $200,000, which it does. Those Confederates do successfully procure $200,000 from the city of Frederick as a ransom from the Confederate forces. And then a major battle is fought on the south side of Frederick, about 3 miles outside the city on the Georgetown Pike, known as the Battle of Monocacy. That battle, while minor by the standards of Antietam or Gettysburg, is the largest military engagement that Frederick immediate vicinity is going to experience during the conflict. And many, in fact, most of the wounded and the dead are going to be brought back into Frederick itself, either to remain forever at Mount Olivet Cemetery or to be treated in U.S. General Hospital Number 1, which, because of the growth of that hospital, will ultimately treat 10,000 patients during the Civil War. There is enough capacity to handle all of the wounded, and none of the hospitals had to overflow into churches or hotels again. The hospital was able to take those patients on, but many of them are still going to be around. Even though the battle is in July, there are going to be patients lingering with wounds that they had suffered from that battle. And subsequent battles in the Shenandoah Valley and near Winchester and Cedar Creek. Patients in many cases are going to be transferred back to Frederick. But there's going to be a celebration at that hospital as a result of the news that Sherman had captured Savannah is going to add to the glow of the celebrations in Frederick's hospitals. Frederick Examiner here kind of gets into that, passes off agreeably to all concerned, and was praised by all of the soldiers for the kindness exhibited by Frederictonians. This is something that is important to recognize, that throughout the Civil War, Frederick's residents are going to be praised very highly for how they came out and supported the wounded soldiers, the sick soldiers, even just the soldiers around them, giving them food, giving them supplies, letting them into their homes. They really took on these young men as their own. And though, of course, thorny relations are always going to exist when an occupying army comes in and there's military law in the city. But for the most part, Frederictonians really step up and are going to do their part to support these soldiers who are around them during the Civil War. And we see that most at Christmas time as they come out. They give money, supplies, food, and then themselves, they come out and physically are there to visit with these soldiers and to become, in many ways, surrogate family members. Many of these soldiers, their families are hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. And so these Frederictonians come in and visit these young men to give them a taste of home. But by the time we get to the spring of 1865, and ultimately through the end of 1865, peace has returned. Now, of course, this is a nice, I believe, Currier and Ives, postcard version of the of a wintertime scene. Of course, not all is peaceful in the aftermath of the Civil War. The beginning of the battle lines being drawn and Reconstruction are going to pass right through the city of Frederick. But 1865 Christmas is going to be celebrated quite a bit differently than the 4 previous years, with anxiety and suffering and illness, wounds and death. It is going to be one marked by peace returning, as well as the soldiers who served in the Union and Confederate armies. That is going to lead to a pretty nasty incident on the streets of downtown Frederick in 1865, which is reported about, in this case, by a Southern-leaning newspaper. This is a returned Confederate veteran who was accosted, attacked by presumably Union veterans who lived in Frederick. All of these people, all of these young men coming back, they had just been serving and fighting and killing, and now are going to be thrown back into their old communities and having to learn to live together, and things were not always pretty. In this case, a former Confederate soldier has a handful of cayenne pepper thrown into his face. So think of it as 19th century pepper spray. This happened on Christmas Day, 1865, showing that even as the war came to an end, these feelings and sentiments and emotions that were so prevalent during the Civil War are still there. Many cases they're pushed below the surface, but they do pop up and rear their heads in many ways during the Reconstruction era, but also up to the current day today. These battle lines still exist in American society. We can see it here on Christmas Day, 1865. And these kinds of fights, these kinds of, where these two sides interact with each other over the Civil War, over those battle lines, still with us today. But through Christmas, we can see that this is, again, the holidays becoming a uniting force, bringing together people to care for those who are in need. That still takes place in Frederick today. It still takes place all over the country and around the world. I'll end with one of my favorite sketches from the Civil War. I started you with one of my favorite letters from Robert Gould Shaw. We'll end with this one from the Civil War, showing Christmas Eve with a wife and children on the home front praying, and her husband off on the battlefront musing on his family and what he was doing at Christmas during the war. And I'll open up for any questions or comments you might have. Feel free to go to the comments section to ask them. I'm going to stop the screen share here and go back over to the comments section. Take a look and see if we have any questions here. All right. So I'm going to start. I'm going to scroll ourselves up here. See lots of Merry Christmases, lots of Merry Christmases. And we got a question from Chris. What, if any, mixed drinks did they enjoy during war times? That is a great question. There is actually I don't have it on me at the moment, but there is a great book, I believe from 1862, which is actually like a bartender's guide to mixing drinks. And you will see a lot of the same drinks that we enjoy today that are in that particular book. I will, Chris, I will respond to your question after the video is over with that link. I love reading it. It's great to see what drinks were around, what people were enjoying, the cocktails that they were enjoying during the Civil War era, and also some of the beer and some of the other alcoholic beverages that they were enjoying, and in some cases using medicinally, of course. So I'll add that in at the after the video is concluded. Keep on down here. Lots of Merry Christmases. Merry Christmas to all of you. Happy holidays. I know we just came to the end of Hanukkah, so happy Hanukkah as well to everybody. And to Rose. Let me see, is this the Clara Barton program from C-SPAN you mentioned? Let me open that link up and see. That one is a Clara Barton article, Clara Barton video. I will add in and I'll respond to your link as well, Rose, with the Christmas program from C-SPAN. I'm flying solo today, so I don't have anybody to help me with links. So I will get that to you after this video has concluded. Megan, Jake, if you don't know about this podcast, I think you'd love it. I have to say, Megan, thanks for watching, and thanks for all the work you all do at Preservation Maryland. I learned of this podcast literally last night. I listened to one of their more recent episodes on the history of Mrs. Claus, which was fantastic. I learned a lot. I am very, very excited about learning more about Christmas history and listening to more of that podcast, which was a lot of fun. Short, I think it was like 12 or 13 minutes. Perfect. Going to be learning a lot more about Christmas, but everyone, if you are looking at Megan's comment in the comments section, highly recommend checking out that podcast. I know I'm going to be watching or listening to a lot more. Keep on going. Gary says about Engelbrecht's diary being a must for anyone interested in Frederick's history. I'm not sure if the museum has a copy of the Engelbrecht diary of the published. It is a very, very thick volume. I would imagine we probably do have it in our library, but Heritage Frederick does have that available. Not sure what their status is in terms of being open right now for research. Probably not, as we're all kind of experiencing COVID right now. But that is a tremendous resource if you want to read more about what it was like during the Civil War era, not just in Frederick, although it is Frederick centered. A must read because it is highly detailed. Engelbrecht was very nosy and lived across the street from Barbara Fritchie as well. He actually debunks the whole Barbara Fritchie story in his diary. So he is a tremendous resource to check out. We have, say hi to some folks, to Paul from up in Pittsburgh. Andrea, thanks for watching, Andrea, with us. Turning 100-year-old buildings into a hospital. Yes, that is very entertaining to read histories of U.S. General Hospital Number 1 and some of the folks that are there during the conflict and kind of the different stories of the building's origins. Was built around the time of the American Revolution, was meant to kind of hold Frederick County militia units. It ultimately is turned into a prison camp for Hessian soldiers during the Revolutionary War. Is used again in 1812 as a staging ground for Frederick militia in the fight against the British, a staging area for the Lewis and Clark expedition before they go to Harper's Ferry, and then ultimately becomes a Civil War hospital. It is a pretty intense history in that particular location. They do again, one of those buildings still stands today. Paul, were Confederate patients kept in separate hospitals from Union patients or just separate areas of the same hospital? Did local Southern sympathizers overtly or covertly visit Confederate patients? So you've touched on all of the reasons that Surgeon General William Hammond has to get involved. There is a Confederate only hospital in Frederick. There was one that was used in the aftermath of Antietam for only Confederates. The rest of them, the patients were mixed. There are Union and Confederate soldiers being treated together, essentially. And there's also going to be 2 tent hospitals set up outside the city of Frederick as well. As they're just northwest of the city, they're also going to have Union and Confederate being treated together. That is going to lead to rivalries and fights in some of the hospitals. They have to, medical officers, medical practitioners going to have to separate some of these men at times. They were treated in the same areas. And this comes to the next question you have, which was, did local Southern sympathizers overtly or covertly visit Confederates? They were very overt. They were very overt in coming in and only wanting the supplies that they were bringing to go to Confederate soldiers, which of course made the U.S. Army doctors, surgeons, nurses, and the Unionist volunteers who are giving their supplies to the hospital authorities who are distributing it to everybody. They did not like that. This is going to lead to lots of sniping back and forth. There's going to be newspaper articles about it. Surgeon General Hammond gets involved and basically says supplies will be turned over to the hospitals and will be distributed equally. But that didn't stop Confederate women, Confederate sympathizing women in the city of Frederick from sneaking in supplies and things for the Confederate soldiers only. That's going to be a major bone of contention in that one vast hospital time period in Frederick. There is an account from a gentleman named George Snowden, who was a hospital guard from Pennsylvania, who actually remarked about the women of Frederick, and he said that the Confederate sympathizers that they had coming through the hospital were far prettier than the Unionist local women who were coming to visit the Union soldiers. So it's weird kind of dynamics going on in these Civil War hospitals. But yes, to your questions, Paul, that is something that was happening. They are treated together, and those covert missions, and in some cases overt missions of Confederate sympathizing women did cause some issues. Why were they called inmates rather than patients? This is from Andrea. This is an amusing aspect of U.S. General Hospital Number 1. And Terry Raymer originally told me this story, and I've since seen it at other hospitals as well. There was a fence constructed around U.S. General Hospital Number 1. And the soldiers who ended up being treated in that hospital very quickly realized it was as much to keep them in as to keep the citizens of Frederick from getting in, to keep them out. This is because Frederick was very much known for its nightlife, just as it is today, was known for its nightlife during the Civil War era. And there were quite a number of saloon keepers who, despite there being martial law and rules. There was a provost marshal for Frederick that said no liquor could be sold to soldiers. That didn't stop patients from sneaking out of the hospital and going and getting drunk and coming back and causing a mess. And so they were very much, in many cases, inmates under martial law, kept there and prevented from going out unless they had a pass. So the patients, they're going to call themselves inmates there, and I ended up calling them that too. They are patients, but they are kept there in some cases by force, from preventing them from going out and mingling with the citizens of Frederick, causing havoc on the streets. What is the style of illustration called? Large drawing. I think you're going back to the General Hospital #1 sketch. I don't know what it's called. I know that that particular sketch, we have a copy at the museum that shows U.S. General Hospital #1 in 1865. When walking tours begin again, will there be tours of the hospital sites in Frederick? Yes, Fred. We are very excited to be returning to doing our One Vast Hospital walking tour. We typically do that during the summer months, the spring, summer, and early fall. Those go out on Saturdays and Sundays. As we get a little closer to the spring and knowing what the situation is going to be with museum visitation, what restrictions may still be in place, we will be putting out news about when we're going to do those tours. It is, I know, at least speaking for me, one of the favorite things I get to do at the museum. I love leading walking tours around downtown Frederick. If you haven't yet done that, please plan to come at some point in 2021 when we can get back to doing tours. The walking tours are amazing. Frederick's architecture is amazing. And the fact that because there's a historic district, most of the buildings that were used as hospitals during the Civil War are still standing and still look very much like they did during the Civil War era. It's astounding. It's a great resource to be able to understand what it was like during the Civil War. You can look around and see the same buildings, the same streets, and you know, to get a feel of what Frederick was like at that time. Greetings from Iowa. We'll have to visit the Hessian Barracks next trip out. Yes, you can get onto the campus. There are historic markers from both, I think, from the Frederick area, but also historic marker from Civil War trails that is at the Hessian Barracks. That tells a little bit about Civil War history at the barracks. It is a great place to visit. It's also across the street from Mount Olivet Cemetery, so you can get lots of Civil War history into one brief visit. Confederate Row, which is a row of several hundred Confederate graves at Mount Olivet Cemetery, is quite close to the front of the cemetery, as well as you can visit Francis Scott Key and Barbara Fritchie and Jacob Engelbrecht if you want to go visit his grave. He's at Mount Olivet Cemetery. So it's a good spot to be able to go and visit quite a lot of Civil War history in Frederick. Keep on going down here. I had heard before from somewhere that chickens and turkeys were eaten much rarer than they are today. It might have been more geared to the colonial period, but do you have any information on this? That's a good question, Barbara. I don't have a definitive answer. I can only say from anecdotally from what I've read that chicken is quite frequently going to be eaten. Mostly when these soldiers can get their hands on them, they're going to eat them. Same goes for cows and pigs, and they're going to be liberated and butchered in some cases against military regulations to be eaten. But holiday time, that's where you see a lot of chicken, a lot of turkey, a lot of duck, a lot of goose being eaten and consumed. That's again another one of those traditions. Was very, very common. Gary, that is a funny comment. All right, well, that looks like the end of the questions here. So thank you all so much for watching with us today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, I would ask before you go, please click that like button. That allows us more people to see these videos. It allows folks to know that you've enjoyed the video as well. You can share even after the fact, these videos get seen by thousands of people, and you can help more people in your networks see those videos by sharing. This video will also later appear on YouTube as well. So if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, we're going to be doing more YouTube specific content in 2021. We're very excited about that. And you can go to the link I've put into the comments section, and you can become a donor to our Support Hope Through History campaign. We are raising $25,000 to support the museum through these difficult times. So if you've enjoyed these programs, please consider supporting the museum. $5 or $10, $100, we'll even take $1,000. Every little bit helps for the museum as we've been working through the difficulties of a pandemic year of 2020. It's been difficult. We have adapted, and thanks to all of you, we have increased our membership numbers, and everything has been, we have adapted pretty well to this situation. And that is in many cases thanks to all of you and your support. So thank you for all that you have done for the museum in 2020 by supporting these videos, and we really appreciate all that you have done for us. And so you're going to see a lot more of us in 2021. We're going to keep doing these videos because we love doing them so much. We're going to continue on even after the pandemic's over. We will continue on doing these videos. You will see me next on January 1st, on New Year's Day. I'll be hosting a pre-recorded video on the Battle of Stones River. Hope to see you all there. That'll be in the evening of January 1st. You can find information about that on our Facebook events page, also on our website, civilwarmed.org. We also have a interview next week, next week with Gail Jarrow with a great book out about Civil War medicine. My colleague John Lustria will be hosting that video. We'll hope to see you live on that. But in the meantime, put my hat back on and say Merry Christmas to all of you. Hope you have a wonderful holiday. Please stay safe out there. If you are traveling, making any visits, please do so safely. Wear those masks, keep each other safe, and we'll see you after the holiday is over. Give us a follow if you don't already here on Facebook. We have a ton of great Christmas and Civil War medicine material coming up. We hope to see you next week, and we'll see you all on our videos, and we'll see you on our Facebook posts, and hope you all have a wonderful holiday. Thank you all so much.